In the spring of the year when the blood is too thick, there is nothing so fine as a sassafras stick. It tones up the liver and strengthens the heart, and to the whole system new life doth impart. That's an old Appalachian folk song about the tree I have beside me, the sassafras tree. Sassafras roots were the original source of root beer, and at one point, America's #1 export. In this video, we're going to look at how to identify the sassafras tree. We'll also talk about some of its edible uses, including how to use the leaves, and we're going to dig up some of the roots, and I'll show you how to make a root tea that tastes just like root beer. And then we're going to look at some of the medicinal uses, and lastly, we'll talk about why in the year 1960 the FDA outlawed sassafras root products for sale, and I'll answer some of the common safety questions about this plant. Stick with me. Sassafras is one of the easiest plants in the world to identify. It has 3 different types of leaves, all on the same tree. So it has regular leaves just like this. It also has 3-lobed leaves, and then it has mitten-shaped or 2-lobed leaves. So you can see there are all 3 different types of leaves on the same tree, and that's how you're going to identify the plant. Now, the only other tree that has this similar pattern that you may run into is called the paper mulberry. So to separate sassafras from paper mulberry, I'll give you a couple more ID features, and the most important is the smell of the leaves. So sassafras is actually in the bay family, and it has a lot of characteristics of plants in that family, including that the leaves smell really, really good. So if you crush up the leaves and smell them, it has, to my nose, somewhat of a lemony smell, and a lot of people say they smell identical to Fruit Loops, which I think they do. So if you've ever smelled Fruit Loops, leaves of sassafras smell just like Fruit Loops. Also, if you take some of the bark actually smells a little bit different. If you take a little twig and you kind of scrape it with your fingernail and smell it, to my nose, it smells identical to lemon pez candy, okay? So it smells like lemon candy. My wife thinks it smells like lemon heads. So the leaves smell like Fruit Loops. The bark smells like lemon pez candy, and that's gonna help you. We'll look at one more feature really quick and then we'll move on. So the last feature we'll look at is that sassafras bark is a greenish color on the younger stems. Now, a lot of trees obviously have green on the twigs, but on sassafras and other plants in the bay family, like your wild bay, they're gonna have stems that stay green for a lot longer. So you can see these are like the size of maybe my index finger, and they're still green. Sometimes they'll be actually like a greenish black. And so that is one of the good ID features of sassafras. And it also enables you to find the plant in wintertime. If you know generally where they are and you want to dig one up in the winter, you can go, and if you look closely, you can find them during the winter using this feature. Next, let's talk about the edible uses of sassafras. So before we get to the roots, I have to mention the leaves, because there's actually a good chance, if you're from the South, that you have eaten the leaves of this plant. Sassafras leaves are used in a dish called filé gumbo. Okay, so if you've ever heard of filé gumbo, that filé is referring to sassafras leaves. Okay, so sassafras leaves are known as gumbo filé. And I actually have here in my pocket some Zatarain's Pure Ground Gumbo Filé. And if you look at the back of this, at the ingredients, all it is ground up sassafras leaves. So it's really cool. You can take these and you can add them raw to salads. If you want to use them in gumbo, they're used as a thickener. So with filé gumbo, the way I understand it is it's a replacement for okra. Okra is usually the thickener. You know, it's got that real mucilaginous quality to it, and sassafras leaves have that as well. So you can use these fresh by just grinding them up and putting them into the gumbo. Some people say put them in a blender with a little bit of water and then pour that into the gumbo, or you can dry them first. Then you can grind them up either with a mortar pestle or a coffee grinder or just by hand, and then you can use it as a spice. And the best time to harvest sassafras leaves for filé is in the spring and early summer when there's still new growth, just like there is here on this tree. So without further ado, let's look at harvesting and preparing the roots of sassafras. So it's generally thought that the best time to harvest sassafras roots is in the early spring. You can get the flavor all year round, but a lot of people say it's going to be best in the early spring. I've tried to harvest the roots sometimes during the summer, and if it's a real dry summer especially, there won't be hardly any flavor. So you definitely want to get it in the spring if possible, but if you can't, then harvest it anytime, and chances are you're going to get some good flavor out. There is a concern because whenever we're digging up these smaller saplings, it is going to kill the sapling. On larger trees, you can actually dig down and find a root coming off of a bigger tree without killing the tree. But keep in mind that sassafras is what's known as a pioneer species. It is a really tenacious plant. So if you take one, two are going to spring back up, is what I've heard people say. And being a pioneer species, it tends to colonize open ground. So if you're going to clear land, it is going to be one of the first things that pops back up along your fences and things like that. So there's no real danger of over harvesting of sassafras, especially since it was, I mean, really harvested heavily for the first couple hundred years of America. You know, from like the Jamestown, Virginia on, it was really harvested heavily, and it's still around. So here in the modern day where people hardly ever harvest it, you're definitely not going to hurt its population at all. Very tenacious plant, so keep that in mind while I'm killing this tree. So the very first thing we're going to do is I'm going to make it easy by breaking off the section here. I'm actually going to save these, and we'll be using these leaves, but that just gets them out of my way for the digging process. Let's do it. So first, I like to clear a little 2-foot radius around the tree just to make it easier to dig up. Next, I'm going to put the shovel about 6 inches away from the tree and press down very gently. And if I get stopped by a root, then I'm going to not push through it. I'm going to dig it up. And this can be a really time-consuming process. You want to be really gentle because you don't want to pierce through any roots. See, I feel one right now, and I don't want to pierce it. I don't want to break it. I want to harvest it. Because a lot of times they go horizontal away from the plant. Some of them go straight down, but some of them go horizontal, and it's really easy to cut those horizontal roots. You can see here what I mean about these roots being horizontal. And what I was trying to show was that you want to get your shovel underneath these roots and pry them up, and then move it over and pry them up, and move it over, pry them up, so you can get as much as you can. You can see a couple of them, these cut off, but I was able to salvage them here. And when we put all of these horizontal roots together, you can see that there's almost as much of these horizontal roots as there is of the taproot. And so if we were to just quickly go in and dig and cut them all off, we would be wasting up to 50% of the root bark, which is what we're after. So now we're going to rinse this off, and I'll show you how to make some tea. All right, so with these smaller roots, what we're going to do is actually just split these to make sure they dry. So I'll just split it at the top here, and I will just peel it apart like that. And for these smaller roots, you are just going to dry them whole like this and use them that way. For the larger roots, I'll show you what we're going to do. We're going to be scraping off the bark because it's actually the bark, the root bark, where the flavor is concentrated. And I don't like to use sassafras roots fresh because from what I have, from my experience, the fresh roots tend to have more of an essential oil type of flavor. And it seems that once they actually dry for a little while, even just overnight, the root beer flavor comes out, and the bark will change from like a whitish color to a deep orangish red, okay? So with this larger root, I am just going to start stripping the bark off like this. And then I'll just let this dry on the table for a few days. And then you're ready to make your sassafras tea. The way sassafras tea is prepared 99% of the time is just by boiling the roots for 10 to 15 minutes. After that, you can actually boil them twice. Some people say 3 to 4 times, but I think twice is about all you can do. And the second time, it'll actually taste even better. However, we're going to do it a little bit different today. So there are a couple reasons why you may not want to boil the roots. If you're using sassafras as a medicine, then the old 19th century medical books say to make what's called a hot infusion. And the reason for that is sassafras roots have volatile compounds in them. So volatile means that it's something that's easily destroyed or dissipated by heat, okay? So something like peppermint oil would be a good example. If you boil a peppermint plant, the whole house is going to have a peppermint smell, but that's because it's evaporating out of the plant. So in those older medical texts, they say that by boiling the plant for 10 to 15 minutes, you're essentially dissipating all of those medicinal compounds and you're making it almost worthless. Now, I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. You are still going to get some medicinal effects just by boiling it, but one of the ways that it was prepared historically as a medicine was as a hot infusion. So instead of boiling it, we're going to boil some water, and then while it's still hot, we're going to put the roots in, but to make sure that it extracts all the flavor, we're going to grind it up. So I've chopped these up really finely into a powder. The second reason you're going to want to actually do this is that if you read people who make root beer out of sassafras, you'll notice they say to do this because anyone who's drinking sassafras tea knows that after you boil the roots for 10 to 15 minutes, it has a really good flavor, but then a little bitter aftertaste. And normally you can sort of cut the bitterness with a little bit of cream or half and half, but it is going to be bitter. So to keep the medicinal compounds in the plant and to avoid bitterness, we're going to make a hot infusion instead of boiling it for 10 to 15 minutes, which would be called in herbal medicine a decoction. So we've boiled some water here and we're just going to add it in. Then we're going to stir it up and we'll wait until the water turns a deep red color. All right, so once it steeps, you can just filter it through a coffee filter or cheesecloth, nut milk bag, something like that. Add a little bit of sugar, maybe a little bit of cream if you like that. And I think doing it this way, instead of boiling it, it definitely leaves a more spicy flavor. You get those oils and it's a real good spicy flavor. Definitely less bitter, but also a little bit less of that sassafras flavor. So it may need to steep for a little bit longer. And I think your roots stretch further when you grind them up that way. So you're exposing more surface area so the flavor can get out a little bit better, but we may have just not steeped it long enough. Definitely experiment with boiling it for 10 to 15 minutes versus infusing it, grinding it up, all those different things. I'm still trying to get the exact perfect flavor profile. But with this stuff, what you could do, you can make a jelly with sassafras tea. Some people will make sort of a concentrate by boiling a lot of the roots and then boiling it down, adding sugar, and they'll make a sassafras simple syrup that you can just take and put a few spoonfuls into a glass of water or a glass of seltzer water to make some homemade root beer, or just have sassafras tea at the ready without having to boil it every time. I've also seen it made into hard candy, and then what I'm going to be doing with it is making homemade root beer, where we'll actually be adding sugar and then yeast, and it'll ferment into a very, very low alcohol content soda, extremely low, almost negligible alcohol, and it will have that natural carbonation, because when yeast breaks down the sugar, it produces carbon dioxide, and then it'll be naturally carbonated. So let me know in the comments if you want to see that. But without further ado, let's talk about the medicinal uses and safety concerns of the sassafras tree. Sassafras has been used as a medicine for hundreds of years. It was very popular in early America, and it's been used for a lot of different things. Historically, it was sort of known as a panacea, which is a term that means a plant that's been used to treat just about everything. Of course, today we know there's no true panaceas, but whenever you see that word panacea, you should be thinking tonic, okay? So a tonic is a plant used to restore functioning to an organ or organ system. And historically, we may have called something like that an alterative. An alterative just generally restores you back to health. So sassafras has a number of medicinal uses. There's really just a couple I want to focus on in this video. So as a tonic, people would take sassafras tea in the spring to help purify the blood and thin the blood. So let's talk about what that means. Well, sassafras would be considered a liver tonic by today's terminology. So a plant that supports the liver and helps it remove toxins from the body. It's well known for this purpose. And there used to be an old saying, drink sassafras tea in March and you won't have to see a doctor for the rest of the year. So it's sort of like our saying today, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Well, similar sort of thought process with sassafras. It would help support the liver in the spring and actually thin the blood. So it does thin the blood. If you're taking blood thinners, you want to be very aware that sassafras has this effect, and it may be ill-advised to use it as a medicine more than just a cup of root beer or a glass of tea every now and then. Sassafras was also used historically on what we would call the eruptive fevers. So it was a plant that it's a very good diaphoretic or sudorific, so it can induce sweating. It can help bring blood to the surface of the skin and help dissipate heat. So it was used in fevers a lot, and specifically in the eruptive fevers, which are fevers that would cause a rash. So measles, scarlet fever, and smallpox are some of the plants that historically it was said to be effective against. The herbalist Darrell Patton in the modern day recommends it for a sort of similar purpose. He recommends it for the herpes simplex viruses, so herpes or chickenpox or shingles. So he considers it a good antiviral against those sort of eruptive viruses. Okay, eruption in this sense of the word eruption means like a skin outbreak. So outbreaks, viruses that cause outbreaks. So those are the couple medicinal uses. Like I said, the main one, the most widespread, is as a spring tonic to purify the blood, restore you back to general well-being, and make you feel good and healthy. Before we end out this video, we need to address some common safety concerns surrounding sassafras. If you go on almost any article on the internet today and read about sassafras, you're probably going to see somewhere that it is a carcinogen and it can cause liver cancer. So I want to talk about where that information came from and why most expert herbalists and expert foragers do not believe that warning is true at all, okay? So I want to make it very clear right off the bat that there has never been a single case of human cancer associated with drinking sassafras root tea, despite the fact that it has been used for hundreds of years by millions of people. Okay, I want to make that very clear. So where does this information come from? Well, back in the 1950s, researchers were studying one of the oils in sassafras roots, the main active constituent, saffrole oil. And so what they did is they took pure saffrole oil and fed it to rats and mice in a number of different studies. For prolonged periods of time, they fed these rodents saffrole oil and in extremely high doses, and found out that some of the rodents developed tumors on their liver, so cancer. In the year 1960, the FDA outlawed the use or the sale of sassafras roots in food products like root beer, and basically said that it causes cancer. It's a carcinogen. And ever since then, people have not put sassafras roots in root beer and sold it commercially, okay? So there's a lot of problems with this. First of all, the amount of saffrole oil that they were giving these poor rodents on a weight by weight comparison would be more than you would ever consume in pretty much your whole life by drinking sassafras tea. So we're talking about huge amounts of pure saffrole oil over an extended period of time. You would never consume that much on a weight by weight comparison. Another thing is that although it hasn't really been proven or studied adequately, there is one study that suggests that the carcinogen that essentially, so your body will take in the saffrole oil, metabolize it, and then it'll turn it into a number of different chemicals, I guess you could say. And one study showed that one of these chemicals was found in the urine of rodents that consume sassafras or the saffrole oil, whereas humans in the study did not have any of this certain chemical in their urine, suggesting that possibly humans metabolize saffrole oil differently and do not actually create the carcinogen in the first place. That's not 100% proven, but it warrants further study. So it's suggested that that's one thing. And really, like, there's another paper that I sort of looked at where these cancer researchers essentially assert that the model of testing chemicals in these rodent studies, the way they do it, it doesn't really have any real application to human beings, because what they were saying is that almost any chemical that you test, synthetic or natural, 50% of all the different rodent studies are going to show positive results for cancer, because what they do is they take these concentrated amounts of chemicals and force feed it, or even sometimes inject it into rats, and it gives them cancer. So the analogy I like to make is if your next door neighbor was eating 100 lemon peels a day for 3 months and he developed some sort of kidney problem because of it, you wouldn't turn around and stop drinking lemonade. That would be ridiculous to say, oh, well, I guess lemons cause kidney problems because, you know, John down the street was eating 100 lemon peels a day for months at a time. It just doesn't make any sense. So most foraging instructors who have researched sassafras and herbalists who have really researched it have come to the same conclusion. Sassafras is completely safe. I have heard, you know, numerous experts who agree with that. We have Corey Pine Shane, who wrote the book Southeast Medicinal Plant, says that it's safe. We have Daryl Patton, who has 40+ years of experience. We have Samuel Thayer, who is the most well-known, renowned foraging instructor in the United States. All of these people consider sassafras tea safe to drink, at the very least in small amounts. I would say you're never gonna drink as much sassafras tea, like unless you're drinking it 5 cups a day for multiple years, you're probably not gonna have any type of issue with it. So I just wanted to make that really clear for anyone who is concerned throughout this video that I'm teaching people to consume a carcinogen. I don't believe that sassafras is a carcinogen. So anyway, thanks you so much for watching. If you want to learn more about medicinal plants in the southeastern US, make sure to check out my free e-guide to medicinal plants of the Southeast in the description below. Thanks for watching and have a good day.